I was replacing an old mailbox when I found a key that didn't belong to me. Not just any key, a bank key, small, silver, worn around the edges, and attached to it was a faded tag with a number written in black ink. The strange part wasn't the key, the strange part was where I found it. Inside the post that held up the mailbox in front of my house. My name is Robert Walker. I'm 63 years old. I live in a quiet neighborhood outside Tulsa, Oklahoma. And until that morning, I thought my biggest problem was deciding whether to retire next year or work one more season. I've been married to the same woman for 21 years. Linda, a school administrator, organized, responsible, the kind of person who keeps instruction manuals from appliances she bought 15 years ago. If you had asked me that week whether I trusted my wife, I would have laughed at the question. Of course I trusted her. Why wouldn't I? But trust is a funny thing. Most people think it disappears all at once. It doesn't. Sometimes it starts with something as small as a key. The mailbox had been leaning for months. Every time I pulled into the driveway, I'd see it tilted slightly to the left. Linda kept telling me to fix it. Not because she cared about the mailbox, because she hated unfinished projects. So on a Thursday morning, while she was attending a conference in Dallas, I finally decided to replace the entire post. The weather was warm. The sky was clear. One of those quiet Oklahoma mornings where everything feels slower. I dug around the base of the post for nearly an hour. The wood had rotted below ground level. When I finally pulled it free, the bottom section cracked apart. That's when something metallic hit the dirt. At first I thought it was an old screw, maybe part of the original installation. But when I brushed away the dirt, I saw the key, attached to a tag. Number 317. No name, no bank logo, just the number. I stood there staring at it. Because I knew one thing immediately. I hadn't put it there, and neither had the previous homeowner. I'd installed that mailbox myself 18 years ago. I remembered every step. The concrete, the measurements, the paint. The post had been solid when I put it in. Nobody could have hidden anything inside it back then, which meant someone had placed the key there later, someone with access to my property, someone who knew exactly where to hide it. I slipped it into my pocket and finished the job, but my mind stayed on that key all day. That night I called Linda. She was still in Dallas. The conference had another day left. We talked about normal things. The hotel, the weather, the drive. Then casually, I mentioned finding a key. There was a pause. Not a long one. Just enough for me to notice. What kind of key? She asked. A little bank key, I think. Another pause. Then she laughed. Probably from some old lockbox. Throw it away. Maybe she was right. Maybe that should have been the end of it. But something about her reaction felt rehearsed, like she'd already decided what answer she wanted me to hear. The next morning, I drove into town. The key sat in my truck's cup holder the entire way. I wasn't planning to do anything dramatic, just to ask around, see if anyone recognized it. The third bank I visited changed everything. The manager took one look at the key and frowned. Where did you get this? That wasn't the reaction I expected. I told him it belonged to a relative. Not exactly a lie. Not exactly the truth. He turned the key over in his hand, then looked back at me. This is a safety deposit box key. My stomach tightened. What number? He pointed at the tag. 317. I tried to sound casual. Can you tell me who owns it? He shook his head. No, privacy laws. Of course. I thanked him and walked back to my truck. But now I knew something I hadn't known before. The key wasn't random. It belonged to an active safety deposit box. Somewhere. The question was who, and why it had been hidden inside my mailbox post. The more I thought about it, the less sense it made. Why not keep it in a drawer? Why not keep it in a safe? Why bury it in a mailbox? Unless the person hiding it was afraid someone inside the house might find it? That thought stayed with me all afternoon. By evening, I was sitting alone in the kitchen. Linda wouldn't be home until Saturday. The house felt unusually quiet. I found myself looking around differently. Not suspicious, just curious. For the first time in years, I started noticing things. A locked desk drawer in Linda's office. A filing cabinet she always kept organized herself. A small fireproof box in the closet. Things I'd seen hundreds of times. Things I'd never questioned. Because marriage teaches you not to question everything. Sometimes that's good. Sometimes it isn't. Around midnight, I couldn't sleep. So I got up and walked into Linda's home office. I wasn't looking for evidence. I wasn't investigating my wife. At least that's what I told myself. I sat at her desk, opened a drawer, pens, sticky notes, paper clips, nothing unusual. Second drawer, folders, receipts, old tax records. Normal. Then I noticed something strange. One folder had no label. Every other folder in the cabinet was labeled. Every single one, except that one. I pulled the folder out slowly. Inside were bank statements, but not from any account I recognized. The bank wasn't local. The account number meant nothing to me. What caught my attention was the balance, $28,000. I blinked, then checked the next statement, $31,000. The next one showed $34,000. The amount kept growing. Small deposits, regular deposits. Month after month, my hands suddenly felt cold. Not because of the money, because the account wasn't under my name. And it wasn't under Linda's name either. The account holder was listed as something called Cedar Grove Trust. I had never heard those words before, not once in 21 years of marriage. I sat there listening to the silence of the house, trying to convince myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe a family trust, maybe paperwork I'd forgotten, maybe something completely innocent. Then I reached the most recent statement, and that's when my stomach dropped. A deposit had been made just 6 days earlier, $3,000. Beside the transaction was a note, Safe Box 317, verified. I stared at the words, read them again, then again, Safe Box 317, the same number printed on the key sitting in my pocket. That wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be. I leaned back in the chair. For the first time, a thought entered my mind that I didn't want to entertain. What if Linda knew about the key? What if she'd been the one who hid it? I hated myself for thinking it. But once the question appeared, it wouldn't leave. I put everything back exactly where I'd found it. The folder, the papers, every page. Then I went to bed. Sleep never came. Saturday afternoon, Linda returned from Dallas. I heard her car pull into the driveway. The familiar sound should have made me happy. Instead, it made my chest tighten. She walked through the front door smiling, suitcase rolling behind her. "Miss me?" she asked. I smiled back. "Of course." She kissed my cheek, the same way she always did. Nothing looked different. Nothing sounded different. And somehow that made everything worse. Because if she was hiding something, she was very good at it. That evening, we sat together watching television. At one point, her phone buzzed. She picked it up immediately, read the message, then turned the screen away before setting it down. A tiny movement. Most people wouldn't notice it. I noticed because now I was looking, and once you start looking, you begin seeing things you ignored for years. Around 10 o'clock, she headed upstairs. "I'm exhausted," she said. "Long trip." I nodded. A few minutes later, I heard the shower running. That's when her phone buzzed again. Still sitting on the coffee table. Still unlocked. The screen lit up. One message from a contact saved only as J. The preview showed 7 words. Did he find the key yet? My heart stopped. For several seconds, I couldn't breathe. The phone screen went dark, but the message was already burned into my memory. Did he find the key yet? Who was Jay? And how did they know about the key? More importantly, why were they asking about me? I stared at the dark phone screen. Part of me wanted to pick it up. Part of me wanted to pretend I had never seen the message. Instead, I sat frozen on the couch. The shower continued running upstairs, water hitting tile, the same sound I'd heard thousands of times before. But now it felt different. Everything felt different. A minute later, the phone lit up again. Another message from Jay. "Call me when you can." That was all. No emojis, no explanation, just those 5 words. I looked toward the staircase. Still no sign of Linda. Slowly, I picked up the phone. My pulse hammered in my ears. The message thread wasn't locked. The most recent messages were right there. I opened it. The conversation went back months, not years. Months. At first, the messages seemed harmless, short, careful, almost businesslike. Then I saw references to the trust, Cedar Grove Trust, the same name from the bank statements. Transfer completed. Funds received. Keep everything separate. And then another message from 3 weeks earlier. 1 sentence. Once the box is opened, everything changes. I read it twice. Everything changes. A chill ran through me. I kept scrolling. Jay never used a full name. Neither did Linda. It was as if both people knew exactly what would happen if someone else ever read the conversation. Then I found the message that changed everything. It had been sent 2 months earlier. From Linda. "He still doesn't know," Jay replied almost immediately. "He can't find out before October." October. I checked the calendar in my head. October was only 3 weeks away. 3 weeks. Whatever this was, it had a deadline, a plan, a schedule, and somehow I was standing in the middle of it without understanding any of it. Footsteps sounded upstairs. I quickly locked the phone and set it back exactly where it had been. Seconds later, Linda walked into the room, hair still damp, wearing her blue robe. She smiled at me, the same smile I'd trusted for 21 years. "You okay?" she asked. I forced a smile. "Just tired." She nodded. Then her eyes drifted toward the phone. Only for a second, but I noticed. And I noticed something else. The moment she picked it up, she checked the screen. Not casually, not absent-mindedly, purposefully, as if she wanted to make sure nothing had changed. That night, I barely slept. Around 4 in the morning, I got out of bed and sat in the kitchen. The key rested on the table in front of me. Small, ordinary, silent. Yet somehow it had already changed everything. By sunrise, I had made a decision. I needed answers. Not guesses, not suspicions. Answers. And there was only one place that might have them. Safety Deposit Box 317. Whatever was inside that box had people sending secret messages, moving money, creating trust, and planning something for October. I looked at the key one more time, then slipped it into my pocket. Because whether I was ready or not, I was going to find out what was hidden inside. Monday morning arrived gray and windy. Linda left for work just after 7. She kissed me goodbye, told me she'd be home around 6. Everything looked normal. Everything sounded normal. The moment her car disappeared around the corner, I grabbed my truck keys. The bank was 40 minutes away. The same bank whose manager had recognized the key. The drive felt longer. Every mile seemed to drag. Questions kept circling through my head. Who was Jay? Why was money being moved into the trust? And what exactly was supposed to happen in October? By the time I reached the bank, my palms were sweating. I walked inside and approached the front desk. The same manager happened to be there. He recognized me immediately. "Back again?" he asked. I nodded. "I need to know if this key belongs here." His expression changed. Not suspicious. Careful. He asked for the key, examined it again, then disappeared into a back office. 5 minutes later, he returned. "Yes," he said quietly. "It belongs to one of our boxes." My stomach tightened. "Can I access it?" He shook his head. "Only the authorized owner can." Of course, I had expected that answer. Still, hearing it hurt. I thanked him and stood up. Then something unexpected happened. The manager hesitated, almost as if he wanted to say more. Finally, he spoke. "Sir, I probably shouldn't tell you this." I waited. "The box was accessed recently." My pulse jumped. "How recently?" "Last week." Last week, while Linda had been in Dallas, or at least while she claimed to be in Dallas. I tried to keep my voice steady. "One person?" The manager glanced around, then lowered his voice. Two. 2 people. Not one. 2. I felt the floor shift beneath me. The manager quickly ended the conversation and walked away. He had already said more than he should have. But he'd said enough. Someone had opened box 317 only days ago. And they hadn't been alone. Back in my truck, I sat staring through the windshield. The pieces were starting to form a picture. Not a complete picture, but enough to know I wasn't imagining things. Enough to know the secret was real. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Almost. Instead, I answered. "Hello?" For a second, nobody spoke. Then a man's voice came through. Calm. Older. Confident. "Mr. Walker?" My grip tightened on the phone. "Who's this?" Another pause. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. "My name doesn't matter. Stop looking into box 317. The line went silent, and before I could respond, he hung up. I sat frozen in my truck. The call had lasted less than 10 seconds, but it told me everything I needed to know. Someone knew I was asking questions. Someone knew I had the key, and someone wanted me to stop. I looked around the parking lot. People were coming and going. A woman loaded groceries into her SUV. A delivery driver carried boxes into a nearby store. Everything looked ordinary. Yet for the first time in years, I felt watched. I started the engine and drove home. The entire way, I kept checking my mirrors. Nobody seemed to be following me. Still, the feeling wouldn't go away. When I pulled into the driveway, something immediately caught my attention. The front door wasn't fully closed, just slightly open, maybe an inch. I knew I had locked it before leaving. I stood there for a moment, listening. Nothing. No movement. No sound. Slowly, I stepped inside. The living room looked normal. The kitchen looked normal. Nothing appeared stolen. Nothing appeared broken. But then I noticed the hallway closet. The door was open. I never left it open. Inside the closet was a small metal lockbox. It sat on the top shelf behind old photo albums. Only 3 people knew it existed. Me, Linda, and my brother years ago. I climbed onto a chair and pulled it down. The lock wasn't damaged, but the box felt lighter. Much lighter. My pulse quickened. I opened it. Inside should have been old family documents, property records, insurance papers, a few personal letters from my father. Most were still there. One thing wasn't. A sealed envelope. Gone. I knew exactly which envelope. Because I hadn't opened it in over 15 years, my father had given it to me shortly before he died. Told me to keep it safe. Told me one day it might matter. At the time, I thought he was being dramatic. Now, I wasn't so sure. I sat at the kitchen table trying to think. Who had entered the house? Why take that envelope? Why not take the entire box? Unless they knew exactly what they wanted. A terrible possibility entered my mind. What if this wasn't about money? What if it was about whatever had been inside that envelope? I remembered the handwriting. My father's name across the front. Nothing else. No explanation. No instructions. Just his signature. And now it was gone. That evening, Linda came home around 6. Same as always. She walked through the door carrying takeout bags. Smiling. Talking about her day. I watched her carefully. Looking for signs. Any signs. There were none. If she knew someone had entered the house, she didn't show it. During dinner, she suddenly asked a strange question. Did you go anywhere today? The fork stopped halfway to my mouth. Just errands. She nodded. Nothing more. But I noticed something. She wasn't interested in where I'd gone. She already seemed to know. And for the first time, a realization hit me. The key, the trust, the missing envelope, the phone call. None of these events were separate. They were connected. Connected by something much bigger than I had imagined. And somehow, my late father was part of it. I just didn't know how. Not yet. That night, I waited until Linda was asleep. Then I went into the garage. An old filing cabinet sat in the corner, covered in dust. Most of the drawers held documents I hadn't touched in years. Tax returns, insurance papers, repair receipts, nothing unusual. Near the back of the bottom drawer, I found a small notebook that had belonged to my father. His handwriting filled every page. Names, dates, phone numbers. At first, it seemed random. Then I noticed one name appearing over and over. James Carter. The initials immediately caught my attention. JC. Could J from Linda's messages be James Carter? The dates beside his name went back almost 20 years, long before I met Linda. Near the final entry, my father had written a single sentence. If anything happens, the key proves it. I stared at the words. The key, not a key, the key, the same key I had found hidden inside the mailbox post. My pulse quickened. I turned the page. Something slipped out and landed on the floor. A folded piece of paper. Carefully, I opened it. It was a hand-drawn map. One location had been circled in red ink. An address. And the moment I saw it, I recognized the place. An abandoned storage facility outside town. The facility had been closed for years. Most people had forgotten it even existed. I looked at the clock. 12:47 a.m. Then I looked back at the map. For the first time, I felt like I was standing at the edge of a secret that had started long before Linda entered my life. I couldn't stop staring at the address. The abandoned storage facility sat on the edge of town near the old railroad tracks. I hadn't been there in years. Most people avoided the area after dark. The place felt forgotten. Exactly the kind of place someone would choose to hide something. I folded the map and slipped it into my jacket. A few minutes later, I was driving through empty streets. The town was silent. Only a few streetlights were still on. 20 minutes later, the storage facility appeared ahead of me. The chain link fence was rusted. Several sections had collapsed. Weeds pushed through cracks in the pavement. The main office building looked abandoned. Boarded windows, faded paint, broken signs. I parked a short distance away and shut off the engine. For a moment, I just sat there, listening. Nothing. No voices, no traffic, only the wind. I climbed out and walked toward the property. The map showed a specific unit number, Unit 47, near the back of the facility. My flashlight beam bounced across rows of storage doors. Most were covered in dust. Some hung partially open. Others had rusted shut. Then I saw it. Unit 47. Unlike the others, it didn't look abandoned. The lock looked newer. Much newer. Someone had been here recently. My heart started pounding. I stepped closer. Then I noticed something on the ground. Fresh tire tracks. Not days old. Hours old. Maybe less. And suddenly, I had the uncomfortable feeling that I wasn't the first person to come looking for answers tonight. I crouched beside the tire tracks and ran my fingers across the dirt. They were fresh. Very fresh. Someone had been here recently. Maybe within the last hour. I looked around the dark facility. Every shadow suddenly felt alive. Every sound seemed louder. The map in my pocket said, Unit 47. The fresh tracks led directly to it. I stepped closer. The newer lock reflected my flashlight beam. Then I noticed something else. The lock wasn't fully closed. It looked locked from a distance, but up close, the latch wasn't secured. Someone had left in a hurry. My pulse quickened. I grabbed the handle and slowly pulled. The metal door rattled loudly in the silence. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the door rolled upward a few inches. Dust drifted through the flashlight beam. I lifted it higher. Inside wasn't furniture, it wasn't boxes, it wasn't storage. The unit contained a single metal filing cabinet and a wooden table. Nothing else. The setup looked deliberate, like an office someone had hidden inside a storage unit. On top of the table sat a cardboard box, and attached to the box was a yellow envelope. My name was written across the front. Robert Walker. I froze. Someone had expected me to find this place. Someone had known I would come. Slowly, I picked up the envelope. The handwriting wasn't Linda's. It wasn't my father's either, but whoever wrote it knew exactly who I was. And for the first time that night, I realized something. I wasn't following clues anymore. I was following a trail that had been prepared for me long before I ever found the key. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside was a single letter. The paper was old. The edges had started to yellow. At the bottom was a signature I recognized immediately. My father's. I sat down on a wooden chair and began reading. Robert, if you're reading this, then someone has finally found the key. For years, I kept a secret from you. Not because I wanted to, because I believed it was protecting our family. James Carter cannot be trusted. If his name ever appears again, follow the records. Do not follow the money. The money is only bait. The records are the truth. I stopped reading. My heart pounded. James Carter. The same name from the notebook. The same initials from Linda's messages. I continued. Everything began in 2003. Documents were hidden. Names were changed. Accounts were created. If Carter ever tries to recover those records, it means he believes the evidence is gone. It isn't. The evidence remains where he never thought to look. That was the end of the letter. No explanation, no location, nothing. Just one more clue. I searched through the cardboard box. Inside were dozens of folders, property transfers, bank records, legal documents. Most of them meant nothing to me. Then I found a photograph. The moment I saw it, my stomach dropped. 3 people stood together outside a courthouse. One was my father, the second was James Carter, and the third was Linda. The date stamped on the photo was 23 years old, 2 years before I had even met her. I stared at the picture. My mind struggled to process it. Linda knew James Carter before she knew me, and somehow both of them had known my father. Suddenly, the entire story changed. This wasn't something that started recently. It had started decades ago, and I had been part of it without ever knowing. Then I heard a sound outside. A car door closing. Someone else had just arrived at Unit 47. Every muscle in my body tensed. The storage unit suddenly felt much smaller. I switched off my flashlight and listened. Footsteps. Slow. Careful. Someone was walking between the rows of units. Not running. Not searching. Walking like they already knew where they were going. I slipped the photograph into my jacket pocket. The footsteps grew closer. Then a voice broke the silence. Robert? I froze. I knew that voice. Linda. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she appeared in the doorway. The moonlight caught her face. She looked tired. Not angry, not frightened. Just tired. How did you find this place? I asked. She looked at the open envelope in my hand. The same way you did. I shook my head. No more half-truths. Start talking. Linda took a deep breath. Then she stepped inside. James Carter has been looking for those records for years, she said. Your father knew that. I stared at her. Then why are you helping him? I'm not. The answer came so quickly that it caught me off guard. She pointed toward the filing cabinet. Your father asked me to protect those records if anything happened to him. I laughed bitterly. You're telling me my father trusted you before he even introduced us? Yes. The silence that followed felt endless. Then she said something that changed everything. The conference in Dallas was a lie. I wasn't surprised. I was meeting with an attorney. What attorney? One helping me keep those records away from Carter. I looked at her carefully. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't sure what to believe. Then headlights flashed across the entrance of the storage facility. A second vehicle, much larger than the first. Linda turned toward the light. The color drained from her face, and in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, That's him. James Carter had finally arrived. The black SUV rolled to a stop a few yards from the unit. Its headlights stayed on. For a moment, nobody got out. Then the driver's door opened. A tall man stepped into the light. Gray hair, dark jacket, calm expression. I recognized him instantly from the photograph. James Carter. He looked older now, but not much different. He glanced at me, then at Linda. Finally, his eyes settled on the open box of records. A faint smile crossed his face. After all these years, he said. Linda stepped in front of the filing cabinet. You're not taking them. James sighed, almost like he was disappointed. Linda, we're past this. No, she replied. You are. For several seconds, nobody moved. The night air felt heavy. Then James looked directly at me. Your father made a mistake, Robert. I clenched my fists. What mistake? He believed the truth would matter. James took another step forward. The people in those files are gone. The companies are gone. The money is gone. Then why are you here? I asked. That stopped him. Just for a second. And in that second, I saw it. The confidence cracked. Because he knew I was right. If the records were worthless, he wouldn't have spent 20 years chasing them. Linda reached into the box and pulled out a folder. This is why. She tossed it onto the table. James's expression changed immediately. For the first time, he looked worried. Inside the folder were original signatures, contracts, transfer records, evidence, not of stolen money, but of ownership, large pieces of land that had quietly become worth millions over the years. My father had discovered the fraud decades earlier, and James had spent years trying to erase every trace of it. But he had failed, because the one set of records he never found was sitting right in front of him, and now he knew he was too late. James stared at the folder. For the first time since arriving, he looked nervous. Not angry, not frustrated. Nervous. He knew exactly what those papers meant. Years of careful planning. Years of hidden transactions. Years of secrets. All sitting in a dusty storage unit. You don't understand what you're holding, he said. Linda shook her head. We understand perfectly. James looked at me. Robert, your father wasn't the hero you think he was. I didn't answer. At that point, I was done listening to stories. The documents mattered more than opinions. James took another step forward, then another. Linda immediately moved between him and the table. Don't. The warning was clear. James stopped. The silence stretched for several seconds. Then red and blue lights suddenly flashed across the storage units. Everyone turned. 2 police vehicles entered through the broken gate. James's face went pale. Linda looked at me. You called them? I nodded. Before leaving home, I had sent copies of the documents to an attorney whose name appeared in my father's notebook. The attorney had contacted the authorities. I hadn't expected them to arrive this quickly. The officers stepped out. One approached James, another collected the folders from the table. Nobody resisted. Nobody argued, because the evidence spoke for itself. As officers escorted James toward a patrol car, he looked back at me one final time. 20 years of confidence had disappeared from his face. For the first time, he looked exactly like what he was, a man who had run out of places to hide. As the police vehicles disappeared into the darkness, the storage facility became quiet again. For a long moment, neither Linda nor I said a word. The wind moved through the rows of old units, rattling loose metal doors somewhere in the distance. I looked at her, really looked at her. For weeks, I'd convinced myself she was lying to me, that she was part of whatever James Carter had been planning, that the secret bank account, the trust the messages, and the key all pointed to some kind of betrayal? Now I wasn't so sure. "Tell me everything," I said. Linda sat down on the wooden chair. She looked exhausted, not like someone caught in a lie, like someone who had been carrying a burden for far too long. "When your father got sick, he called me," she said quietly. "Before we were married." I frowned. "You barely knew me then." "I know," she nodded. "But he knew me. We had worked together years before, not closely, but enough for him to trust me." She looked at the filing cabinet. "He told me James Carter had spent years trying to locate those records. He said if anything happened to him, someone had to make sure they stayed hidden." I remembered the notebook, the photograph, the letter. Suddenly, everything fit together. "The trust account?" I asked. Linda gave a small smile. "It wasn't for James?" "Then what was it for?" "Protection." She explained it out that the account had been used to pay legal fees, storage fees, investigators, and attorneys over the years. Every transaction had one purpose: keeping the records safe until they could finally be used. "And the messages?" I asked. "The messages looked suspicious because they were supposed to." I stared at her. "What does that mean?" "James had people watching me." The answer surprised me. She continued. "If he ever gained access to my phone, I wanted him to think I was helping him. It bought time." I thought back to every message I had read, every conversation, every assumption I had made, and for the first time I realized how easy it is to build the wrong story when you only have half the facts. We left the storage facility just before sunrise. The first light of morning was appearing on the horizon. For the first time in weeks, I felt calm. Not because all the answers had appeared, because the truth finally had. The months that followed brought more changes than I expected. Investigators uncovered records linking James Carter to several fraudulent land transfers, dating back decades. Properties worth millions had quietly changed hands through shell companies and false paperwork. The documents my father protected became the missing piece, the piece that tied everything together. Several families eventually recovered ownership claims they had believed were lost forever. Some of them wrote letters, some called, a few even visited. Most of them had never heard my father's name before, yet his decision to keep those records had changed their lives. One afternoon, nearly a year later, I visited my father's grave. I brought the notebook with me, the same notebook that had started everything. I sat there for a while thinking about how close the truth had come to disappearing forever. Then I laughed, not because anything was funny, because my father had always been 10 steps ahead of everyone else, even after all those years. Before leaving, I placed a hand on the headstone. "You were right," I said quietly. The key proved it. When I got home, Linda was sitting on the porch with 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to me. No secrets, no hidden messages, no mysterious phone calls, just 2 people watching the sunset. The way we should have been doing all along. Sometimes life changes because of something enormous. A disaster, a tragedy, a life-changing event. But sometimes it changes because of something small. A forgotten notebook, a hidden key, a single sentence written years earlier. And sometimes the truth doesn't destroy a family. Sometimes it saves one. I still have the key. It's in a small frame above my desk. Not because it's valuable, not because it opened a safety deposit box, because it reminds me of something important. The truth has a strange way of surviving. People can hide it, delay it, bury it, lock it away for years, but sooner or later it finds a way back into the light. And when it does, everything changes.